Hello. I am the Linux Mensch. It's good practice to have two kernels installed in your system. So if you have trouble booting into your system, especially after a kernel update, you can restart the computer and boot into the second kernel. And today, I'm going to show you how to install a second kernel in archlinux. So let's get to it. Right now, I'm in my real bare metal computer running archlinux with the awesome window manager. But I'm not going to work today in this computer. I'm going to go into a virtual machine. I already have my virtual machine open up. I'm going to make it full screen. And of course, this is a virtual machine of Arch Linux with the awesome window manager. Okay, so let's open up Xterm and let's just make that a bit larger. You name R, and I'm running the stable kernel, the most current stable kernel, 6.15.2. Now I'm going to open up another workspace. Let's go to workspace 5. And let's open up Firefox. I have Firefox open up, and let's just go to kernel. I have two bookmarks here, you can see. Let's go to kernel.org. So all Linux distributions get their kernels from here. And let's just scan down. So some of the Linux distributions, I think, and I just think, I really don't know, download their kernels from here without changing them. And I think some of them modify the kernels to work with their system. I think. I'm just kind of guessing, but they all get their kernels from here. And kernel.org, they will update these kernels, and then the Linux distributions will take the kernels and update their systems. So normally on my system, I run the most current stable kernel. And now you can see here, there's two stable kernels. And the reason why is that kernel.org will have their mainline kernel. And you can see right now, this one is 6.16. Eventually, this 16.16 mainline kernel is going to become the stable kernel. When it becomes the stable kernel, it's going to move down here, and it's going to be 6.16, and then 6.16.1, and then 0.2, 0.3, and so forth. When this 6.16 becomes the stable kernel, this stable kernel 6.15 will either become end of life, or it will become the most current long-term support kernel. So you can see right now we have two stable kernels, but 6.14 is end of life. So if you come back to kernel.org in a few days or perhaps in a week or two, this second stable kernel, 6.14, will be gone off the list because it's end of life. So they only have one stable kernel, but when there's a transition and there's a new stable kernel, they always keep the old stable kernel here for a few days, maybe a week or two. I'm not sure exactly how long. So like I said, the stable kernel, the old stable kernel will be either become end of life and disappear off the list, or it will become the new most current long-term support kernel. Now I have 5 computers, okay? And on one of my computers, this would happen to me. So I always keep the stable kernel installed on my computers. And when 6.15 became the stable kernel, and I upgraded my computers from 6.14 stable kernel to 6.15 stable kernel, 4 of my computers rebooted fine into the new kernel. But one computer wouldn't boot. It would get stuck in the boot process, and then I couldn't do anything except for unplug the computer to turn it off, which is not good for the computer. Now that computer has a really old NVIDIA video card. I'm guessing that was the problem, but I really don't know. So because I only had one kernel installed, if I would have had the long-term support kernel installed, I could have rebooted into the long-term support kernel, but I didn't. So I had to take a thumb drive of an Arch Linux ISO, boot onto it, mount onto it, and install the long-term support kernel, then reboot, and then I was able to get into it. Now, it was kind of a hassle. Well, number one, it's a kind of a hassle anyways. But it's even more of a hassle because my hard drives are all encrypted. And it's a bit more encumbersome to take a thumb drive of Arch Linux ISO and to boot onto a hard drive that's encrypted and to mount onto it. Now, you can do it. It's not really that hard if you know how to do it, but it's a bit more encumbersome. So, like I said, that's what I did. I booted onto it. I installed the long-term support kernel, and I was able to reboot into my computer and use it. Now, there must have been something wrong or something with that 6.15 kernel that was conflicting with my old computer that has the NVIDIA graphics card. even though I don't know if it was the graphics card, because now that the stable kernel has graduated or moved up to 6.15.2, that computer is able to run the most stable kernel. But at 6.15, it wasn't. And at 6.15.1, it wasn't. But now that it's at 6.15.2, I'm able to run the most current stable kernel on that computer. So I explained all that just to say this. It's better to have two kernels installed. So if you've had trouble booting into the one kernel, especially after an update, you can always boot into the second kernel. And you could even have three kernels installed if you want. It just makes it easier than mounting onto the system with a thumb drive of archlinux ISO, especially if your system is encrypted. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to install, like in this computer right now, I only have the stable kernel installed, 6.15.2. So I'm going to install the long-term support kernel, 6.12.33. If you're adding kernels or deleting kernels or changing kernels, you should always install the officially supported kernels from your Linux distribution. So, because I'm running Arch Linux, I'm going to go to Arch Linux website, and I'm going to go to the wiki, and I'm going to go to kernel. I'm going to click that on, and I'm going to make this a little larger, and I'm going to scan down. So Arch Linux has 6 kernels that they officially support. You can see here there's the stable kernel, the hardened kernel, the long-term support kernel, the real-time kernel, and there's 2 of them, right? There's the real-time stable kernel, and there's the real-time long-term support kernel. And then there's the Zen kernel down here. You can see there's the Zen kernel. So like I was saying, you can go into the AUR and install some other kernels, but you should always install the kernel that's supported by your Linux distribution. So Arch Linux has 6 for you to choose from. And like I said, I'm just going to install this long-term support kernel. And you can have more than one kernel. So I'm going to close my web browser now, and I'm going to go back to Workspace 1 where I have Xterm open up. And before you install a kernel, you should do an update. So let's do sudo pacman syu, and my system is up to date. And now I'm going to install the kernel. So I'm going to do sudo, let's just clear the screen. Let's do sudo pacman s linux.lts, and we're going to install the LTS kernel. Okay, that didn't take that long. And now I'm going to clear the screen. And when you install a new kernel, or you add another kernel, or you delete a kernel, you should always make grub. But before I make grub, I'm going to do something. Go into etc default, and I should spell it right. I'm going to go into my etc default folder. I'm going to ls it, and I'm going to go into this grub file. Okay, I'm going to do vim. Actually, I got to do sudo vim grub. We have, so if you see on line 4, there's a 5-second timer. So when you're booting into grub, you have 5 seconds to go into advanced settings to choose what kernel you want to boot into. Otherwise, it's going to boot into the kernel that's at the top of the list. And in my case, I know that the long-term support kernel would be at the top of the list. So that's the kernel it's always going to boot into automatically if I go past the 5 seconds. But if I go into advanced during the 5 seconds, then I can choose which kernel I want to boot into. So you can change this. You can change this 5 to a 10, 15, 20. You probably don't need 20 seconds, but you can change it to whatever you want. That just gives you more time to go into advanced settings during your boot session, so you can choose which kernel you want to boot into. Now I'm going to go to the bottom of the list, and line 52 is telling you that if you want your system to always boot into the last kernel that you were booted into, you can activate this line. So line 54, I'm going to activate the line. I'm going to delete the number sign or the hashtag and activate line 54. So it's telling you when you activate line 54, it's telling you on line 53, it's telling you have to change at the top grub default to save. Okay, so we activated line 54. Now let's go to the top. Let's change line 3. We have to change line 3. So I'm going to delete the 0 and I'm going to put saved. And then, like I said already, you can change this 5 second to something else if you want. And you know what? Let's just change it to 10, and let's save the file. I'm just going to cd out of there. So whenever you add a kernel, delete a kernel, change a kernel, or change that default grub file, you have to make grub. And this is the command you're going to type in. And in the middle, right here, that's a -O, and it's not a 0. Anyways, let's make grub. Okay, now let's reboot. So you can see, and let me move my face. You can see the countdown. So we can go into advanced settings. If you use your arrow, it stops the countdown. And we can go into advanced settings. So you can see the long-term support kernel is at the top of the list. And whatever kernel is at the top of the list is always going to be the one that it automatically boots into, unless you go into advanced settings, or unless you change the grub file the way we just changed it. So now I'm going to go into the stable kernel. You just use your arrows to go down, up or down, right? I'm going to highlight it, and now I'm going to hit enter. So now we're booting into the stable kernel, and you can see we're in the stable kernel. Now I turned off light DM, so I'm just booting into the TTY. I'm going to log in through StartX. I commit my name in there, and let's put my password. And here we are. Let's StartX, and we can see we're here. Now let's open up Xterm, and let's do uname R. And you can see we're in the stable kernel. Now let's reboot. And if we just see the timer is on right here. We just let the timer go. It's going to go back into the stable kernel automatically because we changed the grub file. See? And now we're back in the stable kernel. You can see right here. There you go. Let's do an HTOP. We're getting 120 megabytes of RAM. Let's do StartX. And let's go into HTOP. Not bad, eh? And that's it. In this video, I talked about why I think it's better to have more than one kernel installed on your system. I also explained to you what happened to me when I only had one kernel installed on one of my computers, and after a kernel update, I couldn't get into the system. And I showed you how to install a second kernel in archlinux, and I showed you how to change the default grub file so that you have 10 seconds to decide which kernel to boot into instead of 5 seconds. And I also showed you how to change the grub file so that it will always automatically boot into the last kernel that you were booted into. Okay? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I am the Linux Mensch.